My aunt said I owed her for raising me. Now she's trying to take over the business I built alone. But I will not give up, and I built this restaurant from nothing. It started as a spark of an idea that kept me up nights, a vision I clung to when things felt hopeless, a dream I poured my heart into. Now, at 27, I finally have something to show for all those sleepless nights, long shifts, and endless challenges. A place I can call my own, with a steady flow of customers and a team of employees who trust and respect me. It's more than just a business. It's my life's work, my proof that I could turn my dreams into reality. But my past has a way of creeping back in. Growing up, things weren't easy. My parents died in a car accident when I was just 8 years old, leaving me alone in a world I was too young to navigate. My Aunt Sarah stepped in to take care of me. She was my mom's older sister, a figure of authority who filled the void left behind. She provided me with a home, food, clothes, and made sure I went to school. For that, I was grateful. She was my lifeline when I had nowhere else to turn. Yet, there were always strings attached. Every act of kindness seemed weighted, her generosity laced with a sense of sacrifice she never let me forget. She'd often remind me how she had given up so much to take care of me, how her life would have been so different if she hadn't taken on the responsibility. Even as a child, I could feel the burden of her words, as if I owed her something I could never truly repay. When I turned 18, Sarah made it clear that her job was done. She told me it was time to stand on my own 2 feet, with a short, clipped farewell and a reminder that I was lucky she'd stepped in at all. There was no college fund waiting for me, no help to get a foothold in life, just a brusque good luck and a gentle nudge out the door. I threw myself into work, taking any job I could find in kitchens and cafes, slowly learning the ropes of the culinary world. Cooking became my refuge, a skill I could rely on when everything else felt uncertain. I spent years saving every penny, and eventually, I scraped together enough to open my own place. It was a grueling, all-consuming process, but I loved it. Every inch of this restaurant is the product of my blood, sweat, and tears. And now, it's thriving. Then, out of nowhere, Aunt Sarah showed up. I hadn't seen her in years, not since I opened the restaurant. She walked in one day, unannounced, scanning the place like she was appraising it. I barely had a moment to process her arrival before she pulled me into a stiff hug and started talking about the good old days, about how she used to cook for me when I was a kid, and how much she invested in my life. It all felt strange, and I chalked it up to her usual tendency to turn everything into a story about her sacrifices. But then, she dropped a bombshell. She looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly, and said, "You know, you wouldn't have any of this without me. It's time you acknowledged that and made things right." I was dumbfounded, barely able to respond as she kept going, explaining how she felt entitled to a share of the business. "After all," she said, "I raised you. You owe me." I was stunned. She wasn't just suggesting a token of gratitude. She was demanding a stake in the business, a partnership, and not just any partnership, but a claim that, as she put it, would be a testament to family loyalty. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here was a woman who had practically shoved me out the door the moment I turned 18, who had offered me no support once I was on my own, now telling me I owed her a piece of my life's work. I tried to explain that while I appreciated everything she had done for me as a kid, this restaurant was my achievement, something I built from the ground up, entirely on my own. She didn't seem to care. Instead, she just smiled, a tight, thin-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Owen, you'll come around. I'm family. Family deserves respect." The next few days were a blur of frustration and confusion. I tried to push it out of my mind, telling myself it was just Sarah being Sarah. But she didn't let it go. She started coming by the restaurant regularly, sitting in on shifts, chatting with my employees, acting as if she had a say in everything. She even began referring to it as our family business, planting seeds of doubt among my staff and customers alike. One of my waitresses, Lily, approached me a few days after Sarah's visit started. She looked uncomfortable, almost apologetic, as she asked if Sarah was actually an investor or something. Apparently, Sarah had been introducing herself to customers as my silent partner, hinting that she had been behind my success all along. It was humiliating, to say the least. The idea that my employees were beginning to question my independence, my role as their leader, all because of Sarah's twisted narrative, it infuriated me. I confronted Sarah about it, trying to keep my cool. I told her that while I was grateful for her role in my life, her actions were making things difficult for me. She laughed in response, a cold laugh that echoed in my ears. She accused me of being ungrateful, saying that my success was built on the foundation she laid. "You wouldn't have survived without me, Owen," she said. "You owe me, and it's time you acknowledged it." I felt trapped. Part of me wondered if there was truth to what she was saying. After all, without her, where would I be? Maybe I did owe her something. But another part of me, a stronger, angrier part, rejected her claim. She hadn't contributed to my business, hadn't been there through the countless hours and endless sacrifices I'd made. Her presence now felt like an intrusion, a calculated attempt to insert herself into something she had no hand in creating. Every day, her interference grew more intense. She would walk through the kitchen as if inspecting it, comment on the decor as though she had some say in it, and even tried to advise me on hiring decisions. The staff was getting uncomfortable, customers were starting to ask questions, and I was beginning to feel like a stranger in my own restaurant. I was at a breaking point. The restaurant was my sanctuary, my one achievement that I could point to and say, I did this on my own. And now, Sarah was undermining everything, twisting the narrative to make it seem as though she was entitled to a share of my success. I knew I had to take a stand, but standing up to Sarah wasn't as simple as it sounded. She knew exactly how to manipulate, how to twist things to make me feel guilty, like I was somehow betraying the person who'd saved me. She invoked memories of my childhood, reminding me of everything she'd given up, all the ways she had supported me. It was like she had this script, a series of words designed to make me doubt myself. As I lay awake night after night, replaying our conversations in my head, one question kept echoing. Was she right? I thought I could handle it. That's what I told myself after the first few confrontations with Sarah. She was just being dramatic, right? She'd get bored, or see reason, and back off. But that's not how things played out. Sarah kept pushing, showing up at the restaurant almost every day now, slipping into conversations with staff and customers alike. It was like she'd made it her mission to be seen as a co-owner, regardless of what I said or did. She even went so far as to start making comments about things she thought needed changing, like the menu, of all things. I overheard her telling Jason, my head chef, that he should add a few family recipes to honor our legacy. Jason looked at her, clearly confused, and then at me. I could see the doubt creeping into his face, like he was questioning whether Sarah's involvement was something I'd been hiding all along. It wasn't just my staff. She was talking to the regulars, too, treating them like old friends and reminiscing about when I was a kid. She'd regale them with stories of all the work I put into Owen, carefully emphasizing her sacrifices and dedication. She painted herself as this selfless figure who had given up so much, making subtle jabs about how no one should forget their roots, as if she'd been the driving force behind my success all along. I realized I had to do something before she completely dismantled everything I'd worked for. So, I sat her down one evening after the restaurant closed. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, going over it in my head until I thought I'd found the right words to make her understand. I started by expressing my gratitude for everything she'd done. I told her how much I appreciated her taking me in when I had no one else, how I respected the sacrifices she made. But then, as gently as I could, I told her that this restaurant was something I'd built alone, and that while I was grateful for her role in my life, she didn't have any claim to it. Her face hardened as I spoke, and the look in her eyes was something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating. As soon as I stopped talking, she leaned forward and said, "You really believe you did this alone, don't you?" She shook her head in what looked like disappointment. "You wouldn't even know how to survive if it weren't for me. Every lesson you learned, every bit of discipline, that all came from me, Owen. You owe me for every step you've taken." I felt the weight of her words settle on my shoulders, a familiar guilt twisting inside me. She was manipulating me, just as she'd done when I was a kid, pulling the strings of obligation like she always had. But this time, I wasn't a kid anymore, and I wasn't willing to let her take control. I took a deep breath and told her that I respected everything she'd done, but I couldn't let her keep coming here, couldn't let her spread this false narrative to my staff and customers. She stared at me, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "You're going to regret this attitude, Owen. I won't be ignored, and I won't let you disrespect what I sacrificed for you." With that, she got up and left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, each step like a nail driving into the foundation of my life. As I watched her leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. The days that followed were a nightmare. Sarah didn't back down. If anything, she doubled down on her interference. She started dropping by unannounced, even during busy hours, and throwing around comments about how things should be done differently. It was like she'd made it her mission to create doubt in everyone's minds about who really controlled the restaurant. She'd make remarks in passing, subtle digs that hinted at her ownership, and soon enough, I started noticing the effects. The staff began acting differently around her, a sort of wary respect mixed with confusion. A few times, I caught Jason looking at me like he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Then came the worst of it. Sarah began spreading stories about her financial support of the business. She told people that she'd given me the startup money, that she'd helped me get on my feet. That was the last straw. None of that was true. She hadn't given me a cent. I'd worked my way up from rock bottom, saved every dollar I could scrape together, and built this restaurant brick by brick, recipe by recipe. But the more she talked, the more her lies took on a life of their own. One evening, Connor, one of my best servers and someone I thought I could trust implicitly, came up to me after a shift. He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting as he asked, "Hey, Owen, is it true that Sarah's part of this place? She mentioned something about helping with the startup costs, and I didn't know if, I thought you did it alone." The betrayal stung. Here was one of my longest-serving employees, someone who had seen me pull all-nighters, who knew how much I'd sacrificed, now doubting me because of Sarah's meddling. I assured him that I'd built the restaurant on my own, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, a seed planted by Sarah that was already taking root. As the rumors spread, my focus started slipping. I was spending so much time dealing with Sarah's drama that I couldn't put my full energy into the restaurant. Customers were beginning to notice the tension, too. Some of my regulars gave me strange looks when they overheard Sarah's comments about her sacrifices, and a few even asked me about her involvement. I tried to brush it off, saying she was family, and that she sometimes exaggerated things. But I knew that the damage was being done, slowly and surely. I decided I couldn't let her take this from me. Not my reputation, not my business, not my peace. I started taking steps to protect myself, documenting every instance where she crossed a line, every manipulation and lie she spread. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd be ready. I began writing down every detail of her interference, compiling a list of statements from employees who'd witnessed her claiming ownership. If it came to it, I'd be prepared to defend myself. But Sarah wasn't done. Sensing my resistance, she became more aggressive, almost as if she could smell the battle brewing. One evening, she showed up unannounced once again, waltzing in with this sense of entitlement, as though she belonged there. She didn't even wait for me to come to her this time. She barged straight into the back office, brushing past employees and heading straight for me. "You're not handling this well, Owen," she said, her voice low and sharp. "You could have had a smooth partnership, could have made this easy. But since you want to make this difficult, I'll just have to take a more proactive approach." I asked her what she meant, but she wouldn't elaborate, only giving me that same cold smile before she left, leaving me with a pit of dread growing in my stomach. The following morning, I found out what her proactive approach meant. Sarah had started calling my suppliers, introducing herself as the new co-owner and making demands. One of my key suppliers called me, bewildered, asking if I'd changed ownership or had brought on a partner. He told me that Sarah had tried to renegotiate pricing on her own, claiming it was to benefit the family. I could feel my hands shaking as I assured him that there were no changes in ownership, that Sarah had no say in anything related to the business. But it was clear that she was escalating, trying to undermine me by taking control of the details. Her involvement was turning into a full-blown attack, a bid to seize control of the life I'd built. At this point, I was questioning everything. what my next steps should be, how to protect my business, and even what Sarah's real intentions were. I had spent my whole life believing that family meant loyalty and trust, but now that concept felt twisted, distorted into something ugly and foreign. Sarah's interference reached a new level, and I could see my control over the restaurant slipping away. She wasn't just meddling now. She was actively trying to sabotage my credibility and influence over the business I'd spent my life building. I knew I had to act fast. I needed a plan, something to protect myself and ensure that Sarah couldn't take away everything I'd worked for. So I did what I could to prepare. First, I started gathering evidence. I'd heard enough horror stories to know that verbal assurances meant nothing when things went south. I began documenting every encounter with Sarah, every time she stepped out of line or interfered with business decisions. I kept meticulous notes on her uninvited visits, her comments to employees, and even the rumors she was spreading about her financial contributions. I kept all of this in a locked drawer at home, somewhere she couldn't get to, in case things got even uglier. It wasn't long before she sensed I was resisting her, and as if to counter that, she started to dig deeper, demanding access to financial records, insisting she needed to know where the restaurant's money was going to ensure the family's legacy was secure. Her phrasing made me want to laugh or scream. She was framing it as if she were swooping in to rescue me, as if I hadn't been the one keeping this place afloat through sheer grit and sacrifice. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I confronted her as she sat in the dining area, once again talking to one of my employees as if she had any authority there. I asked her to join me in the back office, where I intended to lay down the law once and for all. I could feel the eyes of my staff on us as we walked back, and the tension in the room was thick. Everyone knew something was wrong, but I couldn't afford to think about that now. Once we were alone, I told her directly that her behavior was unacceptable, that her interference was damaging my business, and that I needed her to step back. I reminded her that she hadn't invested a cent into the restaurant, and that, legally, she had no claim over it whatsoever. I even told her about the evidence I'd been collecting, hoping it would make her see how serious I was. Instead of reacting with shock or remorse, she just smiled, that cold, knowing smile she'd adopted since this whole ordeal began. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Owen, you're forgetting something important. This isn't just about money or ownership. This is about family loyalty. And if you want to dig up the past, be careful what you find." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. She knew exactly what she was doing, using my past as a weapon against me, twisting the idea of family loyalty to keep me under her control. Her veiled threats left me reeling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding onto something I wasn't seeing. Over the next few days, I couldn't let go of the conversation we'd had. Her words echoed in my head, gnawing at me, planting seeds of doubt and questions I hadn't thought to ask before. If she had nothing to gain, why would she push this hard? What exactly did she mean about digging up the past? Feeling desperate, I went back to the house where I'd grown up, the one Sarah had kept after I moved out. It was where she'd stored all my parents' things, and I knew there were boxes I hadn't gone through since I was a kid. She'd always said I could go through their belongings if I ever wanted to, but I'd never taken her up on the offer. Until now. The attic was full of dust and memories, with boxes upon boxes of items packed away, untouched for years. I rummaged through them, finding old photos, papers, little mementos of my parents' life. Eventually, I found a box with some financial documents. Most of it was beyond me, but one thing caught my eye. A legal document detailing a small inheritance my parents had left for me. A trust fund that was supposed to go to me when I turned 18. I sat there, staring at the paper, trying to process what I was seeing. Sarah had never mentioned anything about an inheritance, not once. Instead, she kicked me out at 18, acting as if she'd done more than enough by giving me a roof over my head for a few years. Yet here was this trust fund, meant for me, that I'd never known about. Anger bubbled up inside me as I started piecing things together. It wasn't a huge sum of money, but it was enough to have given me a head start, maybe even helped me open my restaurant sooner. But she'd kept it from me, never even hinted at it, probably hoping I'd never discover it. I wondered how much of it she'd used, how she'd managed to make me believe I owed her for everything. all while holding on to something that was rightfully mine. Fueled by anger and a need for answers, I went to her house that same night, the legal document in hand. She opened the door with that same cold smile, as if she'd been expecting me. Without wasting a moment, I held up the document and asked her to explain. For a moment, she looked taken aback, but then her face hardened. "You don't understand what it's like to raise a child on your own, Owen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You have no idea what I went through to keep you fed, clothed, and safe." I cut her off, pointing out that the money was supposed to be for me. I told her that withholding it was deceitful, that she'd built this whole narrative about her sacrifices while conveniently keeping quiet about the funds my parents left behind. Her face twisted with anger, but there was something else there, too, something darker. "You have no idea what's best for you," she said, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You were a kid, and I made the best decisions for both of us. That money allowed us to live, Owen. It allowed me to give you a life." I asked her, point blank, how much was left in the trust. Her face gave it away before her words did. There was nothing left. She'd used every penny, draining the fund over the years to support her own life, all while making me feel like an endless burden. And now that I'd built something of my own, she was back, insisting I owed her. Standing there, a wave of realization washed over me. She had no intention of stepping back. This wasn't about family or loyalty. It was about control. She saw the restaurant as her golden ticket, her reward for the years she'd invested in me, or rather, the years she drained my inheritance and turned it into a prison of obligation. "I'm not giving you anything," I said, voice shaking but resolute. "You may have taken from me before, but this business is mine. You have no claim here." Her face darkened. She took a step toward me, her gaze hard and unrelenting. "This is far from over, Owen. You have no idea the lengths I went to for you. I won't be cast aside so easily." She slammed the door, leaving me standing there in the cold night air, heart pounding, anger boiling over. I knew I couldn't let her go on like this, not without a fight. I made my way back home, determined to protect what was mine. That night, I contacted a lawyer, determined to safeguard my business from any legal claims she might try to make. I explained everything, from her interference to the inheritance, and he advised me to draw clear boundaries, to formally establish ownership of the restaurant. He also warned me that if she decided to pursue legal action, I should be prepared for a battle. In the days that followed, I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and relief. For the first time, I was starting to see Sarah for who she really was, and I understood that family ties didn't give her the right to my life or my work. I steeled myself for what might come, knowing that this wouldn't be the end. Sarah was right about one thing. This was far from over. But I was done living under her shadow, done letting her control me through guilt and manipulation. If she wanted a fight, I was ready. I spent the next few days on edge, waiting for Sarah's next move. I knew she wouldn't back down after our last confrontation, but I wasn't sure what form her retaliation would take. My lawyer assured me that I had a strong case to protect my business, but that didn't erase the nagging feeling that Sarah had another card to play, something I wasn't prepared for. The restaurant felt different, too. There was an unspoken tension, a lingering unease in the air that my employees and even the regulars could sense. My staff didn't mention it outright, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Some of them were still grappling with Sarah's claims, wondering if she really had a stake in the business. I tried to reassure them, to set the record straight, but rumors have a way of sticking around, even after the truth has been revealed. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up after the lunch rush, I got a call from my lawyer. He had been digging into the details of the inheritance and found something disturbing. An additional trust document, one that Sarah had never mentioned. According to this document, my parents had left not just a small fund, but a significant life insurance policy with instructions to provide for my future education and well-being. But the policy had mysteriously been cashed out when I was around 12, just a few years after I'd started living with Sarah. The idea that Sarah had taken my inheritance was one thing, but this was different. This was an amount large enough to have set me up for life, to have provided every opportunity one could have dreamed of. The fact that she'd accessed it and hidden it from me added a whole new level of betrayal. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, like everything I thought I knew about my life had been a lie. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. She'd spent years making me feel like a burden, like I owed her for everything, all while using my parents' money to sustain herself. And if my lawyer hadn't discovered the document, I might never have known. I felt like I was unraveling, my sense of self crumbling as I realized how deeply she'd manipulated me. Fueled by a mixture of fury and desperation, I decided to confront her once and for all. I wasn't going to let her rewrite my history or take my future. That evening, I drove to her house, my fists clenched as I rehearsed what I would say. This time, I wasn't leaving until I had answers. When I knocked on her door, she answered with a cool, collected expression, as if she'd been expecting me. I held up the document, the life insurance policy she'd cashed out, and demanded an explanation. For a split second, I saw something in her eyes. Panic, maybe guilt, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual icy demeanor. "You don't understand what I went through, Owen," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of superiority. "Raising you was no easy task. The money was necessary, not just for you but for me to maintain a stable home. I was doing what was best for both of us." Best for both of us? I shot back, barely able to keep my voice steady. "You spent years making me feel like a burden, like I was an obligation you regretted taking on. And now I find out you were using my parents' money the whole time?" She shrugged, feigning indifference. "It was for the greater good. You wouldn't understand the sacrifices I had to make." Sacrifices? The word came out as a laugh, bitter and disbelieving. "You took my parents' money and used it to support yourself, all while making me feel like I was indebted to you. That's not a sacrifice. That's theft." Her face twisted with a mix of anger and disdain. "You're too young to understand the complexities of life, Owen. Your parents left me with nothing but responsibility and expectations. I was the one who had to pick up the pieces, who had to provide for you, even when it meant putting my own dreams on hold." The irony of her words nearly made me laugh. She'd been putting herself first all along, creating a story of sacrifice and duty while quietly siphoning off what should have been my future. Her entire narrative of selflessness was just a cover, a way to keep me loyal while she drained the resources that were meant to give me a better life. I stared at her, finally seeing the truth with painful clarity. She didn't love me, not really. I was a means to an end, a pawn in her carefully crafted story of suffering and sacrifice. Her manipulation had been so thorough that, for years, I'd actually believed I owed her. "This ends now, Sarah," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I'm cutting you off. You're not welcome at the restaurant, and you have no claim on my business, my money, or my life. You've taken enough from me." For a moment, she just stood there, stunned. Then, her face twisted into a scowl, and she hissed, "You ungrateful little brat. I gave you everything. Without me, you'd be nothing." I felt a surge of defiance, a strength I hadn't known was there. "No, Sarah. Without you, I might have had a chance at a real future, a future that wasn't controlled by your lies. I don't owe you anything." She looked like she was about to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked out, the weight of years of manipulation lifting from my shoulders with every step. I could feel her eyes on me as I left, but I didn't care. I was done with her, with the lies, with the endless debt she tried to trap me in. But of course, it wasn't over. The next morning, I received a letter from Sarah's lawyer, demanding that I reconsider my decision to cut her out of the business. According to the letter, she claimed she had invested time and resources into raising me and that she deserved compensation. I could hardly believe the audacity. She was actually trying to take me to court over her so-called sacrifices. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who assured me that Sarah's case was flimsy at best. But even as he talked me through the legal strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Sarah was relentless, willing to do anything to maintain her control, to keep me tied to her twisted version of family loyalty. I was bracing myself for the fight of my life. Every day brought new challenges, new rumors, and new demands from her lawyer. My employees were confused and anxious, wondering what was going on, and my customers sensed the tension as well. The restaurant, my sanctuary, was becoming a battleground. The one place I'd built for myself now tainted by Sarah's reach. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from an old family friend, Mark, who'd known my parents well. He said he'd heard about the situation and wanted to talk. We met up, and over coffee, he told me things I'd never known, pieces of my family's past that Sarah had conveniently kept hidden. According to Mark, Sarah had always been envious of my parents. My father had been successful in his career, and my mother was well-liked and respected. Sarah had often made remarks about their perfect life, about how they owed her for always supporting them. It wasn't out of love or duty that she'd taken me in. It was a calculated decision to fulfill her own need for power and control. Mark also hinted that Sarah's grip on me had started long before my parents' accident. She'd been manipulating situations, making them feel guilty for their success, pushing them to rely on her more and more. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that Sarah had been this way all along, weaving webs of control that stretched back to my parents' lives, too. Hearing this from Mark was both devastating and liberating. I could see now that Sarah's actions weren't just about me. They were part of a larger pattern of resentment and entitlement. She had always viewed family as something to possess, a tool for her own gain. I walked away from that conversation more determined than ever. Sarah might have stolen my past, but she wasn't going to control my future. I was done being a pawn in her twisted game. I was prepared to fight for my freedom, my life, and my business, no matter the cost. With everything I'd learned about Sarah, I felt an unshakable resolve growing inside me. She might have taken advantage of me for years, siphoning off my parents' legacy and manipulating me under the guise of family loyalty, but she wasn't going to take anything more from me. The legal threats came in waves, each more aggressive than the last. Her lawyer's letters were filled with claims about her investment in me, emotional labor, and sacrifice. They even included fabricated expenses she'd supposedly incurred over the years on my behalf. The audacity of it all was staggering, and I felt sick reading each line, knowing Sarah was trying to paint herself as a benefactor rather than the manipulator she truly was. Despite my lawyer's reassurances, the stress was overwhelming. The restaurant, my place of peace and pride, had become a source of anxiety. Every time I walked through the doors, I wondered if Sarah had been there, if my employees were still questioning my control, if customers had heard her latest lies. My staff looked to me for stability, but all I could offer were shaky reassurances as I fought to keep my own head above water. Then, in a final blow, Sarah took her accusations public. I woke up one morning to find a post circulating on social media. Sarah had written a long, emotional story, painting herself as the heroic aunt who'd raised me out of the goodness of her heart, only to be betrayed by her ungrateful nephew. She wrote about all the sacrifices she'd made, how I was erasing her contributions, and how she deserved a share of the business she'd helped build. Her narrative was slick, her words dripping with self-pity, and she ended it with an appeal to the public sympathy. The post went viral in our town. Comments flooded in from people who knew neither me nor her, all sympathizing with her plight, calling me selfish and ungrateful. Even some of my regulars, people I thought knew me better, were reaching out to ask what was going on. I felt like my world was unraveling, every bit of trust and respect I'd built being torn down by her lies. But amidst the anger and hurt, a new kind of clarity emerged. I'd spent my entire life under her control, second-guessing myself, doubting my worth, feeling like I owed her my success and my very existence. I realized then that I had to do something drastic to reclaim my life. If I didn't, she'd continue to poison everything I held dear. I decided to go public with the truth. With my lawyer's help, I gathered every piece of evidence I had, legal documents, the life insurance policy she'd cashed out, witness statements from employees who'd seen her interference firsthand. I wrote a statement of my own, detailing the years of manipulation, the inheritance she'd stolen, and the way she'd twisted the narrative to suit her own needs. I was brutally honest, not holding back on the pain and betrayal I'd felt. I didn't want pity. I wanted people to understand the truth. After posting my side of the story, I braced myself for the backlash. But to my surprise, people listened. Those who had been quick to judge started to retract their comments, expressing sympathy and support. Regular customers left messages of encouragement, and friends reached out, offering help and understanding. My employees rallied around me, standing by my side as I fought to clear my name. The tide was turning, and for the first time, I felt like I was reclaiming my own story. But Sarah, predictably, wasn't finished. She continued to issue demands, trying to paint my statement as another attack on her generosity. Yet her arguments were losing power. People were seeing through her lies. With my reputation repaired and my business safe, I made one final, decisive move. I cut all contact with her, blocking her on every platform and making it clear that I would pursue legal action if she continued her harassment. It was over. The relief I felt was immense, like a weight had lifted off my chest, freeing me from the chains she'd wrapped around me for so long. I walked into my restaurant the next day, feeling like a new man, no longer haunted by her ghost. My employees noticed the difference too. The tension had vanished, replaced by a sense of calm and confidence. I'd spent years believing that family loyalty meant submission, that I had to bear the weight of Sarah's sacrifices. But in breaking free, I realized that family isn't defined by control or obligation. It's built on respect, trust, and genuine care. I no longer owed Sarah anything. Not my success, not my gratitude, and certainly not my future. Finally, I was free.